Typography is the most important and probably the most underestimated part of web design. In this video, I will share some practical typography tips and tricks that will help you drastically improve your designs with just a few lines of CSS. Let's dive in. The demo, as always, is going to be on CodePen, and the link to that CodePen will be in the description. We will apply all typography tips that we mentioned to this component to see how much better we can make it look. And the first tip that I want to mention here is fluid typography. Usually when you're dealing with typography on the web today, you set up multiple breakpoints with media queries, and then you tweak the font sizes for each of those breakpoints. And that basically means that you have a fixed number of those breakpoints where you tweak the font sizes. Fluid typography, on the other hand, is a responsive typography technique where the text scales with the screen size. And that means that you set up your font size with the viewport units, because viewport units are tied to the screen size. So the bigger the screen gets, the bigger the font size will be, and the smaller the screen gets, the smaller the font size will be as well. Let's apply that to this demo. And before we do that, I'm going to resize my browser so you can see that the text size remains exactly the same both for my headline and for the rest of the text, regardless of how big or small the window gets. So let's change font size to viewport units. First, I'm going to tweak my headline. This is going to be this selector, H1. I'm going to add another font size property. Let's set it to something like 8 viewport width units, which is going to be a similar size to our 6 rem units that we have defined earlier. 8 viewport width units. There we go. And now if we resize our window, you're going to see that our headline is getting bigger and smaller depending on the screen size. And I will apply exactly the same logic to my body text, where we're going to set font size to 3 viewport width units, which is going to be similar to our font size currently set to 2 rems. There we go. If I resize my browser, the text is scaling up and down. And now our typography is tied to the screen size. But there are actually two problems with this. And the first problem is when the screen gets too big, our font sizes get way too big. We never want the font size to be this big. And another problem is when the screen gets too small, the text gets way too small. This is completely unreadable. So we actually want to restrict the maximum and minimum font size. And typically you could do that using the media queries, but there's actually a much simpler way to do that using the clamp function in CSS. Clamp function allows you to specify minimum, maximum, and preferred values for a certain property. So in our case, a preferred value is value we specified with the viewport width units, and minimum and maximum values will be specified with fixed units. So let's tweak this. I will deal with my headline first. We're going to wrap this into clamp function. Minimum size should be something like 2 rem units. Our preferred size is 8 viewport width units, exactly as we have now. And maximum size should be something like 6 rem units. Now on this small screen size, our headline is set to 2 rem units. This is the value that is being applied. But as we increase the size of the screen, this is changed from 2 rem units to actually 8 viewport width units. So our headline is becoming bigger depending on the screen size until it gets to the upper boundary of 6 rem units, in which case it will not grow any more. And let's apply clamp to our body text as well. Clamp, minimum value is going to be 1 rem unit because we want text to be smaller than the headline. Preferred value is going to be 3 viewport width units, and the maximum value is going to be 2 rem units. Let's see how this works. There we go. So this is our maximum value now, and minimum value is somewhere around here. We actually want to set line height for our headline, so I'm going to do this really quickly. 1.1. Right, this is much better. And this is our first tip, use fluid typography. And as you can see, all you need to do is use the clamp function, specify upper and lower limits for your font sizes, and use viewport width units or another unit that is tied to screen size. And you're going to be able to scale your typography as the screen gets bigger or smaller. Our second tip is going to be related to letter spacing. So if we look at our headline here, CSS Weekly, which is all uppercase, typically what you want to do in that example when you're dealing with the uppercase letters, and this is particularly important for smaller sizes, you want to increase letter spacing. So for this example, CSS Weekly, we can increase letter spacing to something like 0.04 rem units just to add a little bit more space between letters, which will actually make the headline a bit more readable. And this might not be very important for larger text sizes like we have here, but on smaller sizes, somewhere here, this might be a little bit more noticeable. So let's try it out. Letter spacing, 0.04 rem units. Now the difference is very subtle, but if I comment out the property and uncomment it again, you can see that there is a slight difference there. So when you're dealing with the uppercase text, particularly on smaller font sizes, you want to increase letter spacing just slightly. This will make it a lot more readable. And if you're not dealing with the uppercase text, for larger screen sizes, you actually want to decrease the letter spacing. So let's try this out. I'm going to comment out text transform uppercase. Let me resize my screen to get a little bit bigger font size. There we go. Here, what you want to do is set negative text spacing. You want to make those letters a little bit more condensed. This might not be this visible on this particular font we have here, but typically what you want to do when you're dealing with larger, not uppercase font sizes, you actually want to reduce the letter spacing and set it to something like minus 0.04 rem units. Let's try it out. And now if I comment this out, you're going to see there is a slight difference there. So tip number 2 is related to letter spacing. When you're dealing with the uppercase text, particularly on smaller font sizes, you want to increase letter spacing. And when you're dealing with the larger font sizes, not uppercase, then you want to decrease letter spacing slightly. This will make your design look better and your text a bit more readable. Next tip is related to line length. If we look at this paragraph, when I increase the window size, you're going to see that our line becomes very, very large, and this can then become less readable because typically in typography, line that is between 50 and 70 characters is considered to be the most readable. So here we want to restrict our line width, and this now can become very challenging because we're dealing with fluid typography, and as you see, it's getting smaller and bigger as our screen size increases or decreases. But what we can do here is we can specify maximum width for our text using the character width. And character width is a unit that is specified as 0 glyph width. One character width is going to be equal to the width of our 0 character. And this means that in our fluid typography example, this will be dynamic as well. So let's try it out. I will set maximum width on my paragraph here. And I will specify it as 50 characters. And this is now already much more readable. But the problem here still is that this is not perfectly balanced. As you can see, this first line is longer than our second line and even more than our third line. So we would actually want to balance this a little bit more. Typically on web, you never want to do text align justify because this will make your text completely unreadable. Let's try it out. Text align justify. And as you see, there's way too much space between those words. So this not only looks bad, but it's actually difficult to read. So on the web, never use text align justify. But what you can do instead, you can actually use text wrap balance property, which will balance line lengths of the text. And this is exactly our next tip. We want to balance line length a little bit better. So I'm going to specify text wrap balance. And you see immediately that our text has been changed. Now those lines are in similar length, which will make it more readable and also it'll make it look better. Unfortunately, text wrap balance is currently supported only in Chrome Canary, but you can safely use it as progressive enhancement because if the browser doesn't support text wrap balance, you're going to get this version of the design. And if the browser supports text wrap balance, or when it starts supporting it, your text will, as the property says, be much more balanced. And this is probably going to be even more useful in your headlines because when you're dealing with headlines, you often end up in a situation when one word falls into the next line, and that is never what you want to see because this is in typography terms called an orphan, which is a single word on one line. Text wrap balance will help you with that, and you're never going to end up with a situation where your headlines are looking a little bit weird because that one word has somehow fallen into the next line. Before we go on, I have one huge thing to ask you, and this is, if you like this video, and I'm guessing you do if you stick with it for so long, please hit that like button because supposedly it's good for YouTube algorithm and more people will actually be able to see this video that way. Thanks so much. Our next tip is to tweak text decoration. This is typically related to links when you have underlines on the text. This is also an accessibility concern, so you should almost never remove underlines from your links because some users might not be able to distinguish links just based on their color. But sometimes those underlines might not look great. Fortunately, there are properties in CSS that can help you improve those lines. So let's apply them to our links. This is going to be our A selector. And first, we're going to tweak the color of our underlines. So we have this yellow here exactly as the font size, but we want our underlines to be just a tiny bit more subtle. Of course, when we do that, we want to make sure that they are still visible and accessible, but they will look a little bit better if they're less prominent than the text. So let's try this out. This is going to be text decoration color property. And we're going to use exactly the color we have for our text, this yellow, with opacity set to something like 80%. And we also might want to increase lightness of our color, maybe to 65%. Let's see how this looks. It's really subtle, but it will make your text look much more proficient. Next thing that we want to do is we want to decrease the underline thickness just a bit. And we can do this using the text decoration thickness property. And let's try using 1 pixel. This is way too small at this size. As you can see, it's almost invisible. So let's try 2 pixels. All right, this is better, but now this is sticking to the text too much. Luckily, we can tweak this using the text underline offset property. So I'll set this right here, text underline offset. Let's set it to 4 pixels. This is now looking a lot better. So when you're dealing with links, tweak color, thickness, and position of your underlines, which will make your links look just a tiny bit better. Our next tip is related to unordered and ordered lists. In this example, we have this unordered list with those bullet points. But as we're dealing with just links and our list, we might want to tweak the color for our bullets. And we can easily do that using the marker pseudo class. So let's try it out. I will add li selector and target its marker pseudo class. And marker is actually the bullet point in this particular example. So let's set its color to exactly the color we have for our links. And this is already looking a little bit nicer. And the great thing about using the marker pseudo element is that it allows you to specify the marker itself. And you can specify that using the content property. This allows you to specify basically anything you want, including emojis. So let's try it out. I'll find a nice star emoji, maybe this one. There we go. Even though this is not working, it's far from ideal. We need to tweak the size of our marker. So we can specify font size here, for example. And as we're dealing with fluid typography, we can specify it in viewport width units as we did before. So let's try that. Do viewport width units and let's see what we get. All right, this is a little bit nicer, but we still want to tweak the positioning of this and add a little bit of space between the marker and our actual text. Unfortunately, marker pseudo element doesn't allow you to specify anything. It only allows you to tweak values related to fonts. So you can tweak positioning, you can add margin or padding to that, and you can even adjust it to make it a little bit more centered. Fortunately, there is a way around that, and that's what we will do next. The first thing that I want to do is add a little bit of space between text and our marker, and I can do that if I add left padding to my list items. I'll add another selector here, li, and we'll add padding inline start, because we always want to be using logical properties and not physical ones. And if you don't know what logical CSS properties are, check out my video on logical CSS properties. And let's specify this in character units because we want this also to be fluid as our font size is increasing and decreasing with our screen size. So let's set this to 0.7 characters. Okay, this is better now. Let's resize the page to see what we get. This is looking pretty much okay now. But on very large screen sizes, it might be a little bit too big. And on very small screen sizes, it might be a little bit too small, or at least it's not centered ideally. And this means that we want to apply clamp function to our font size on our marker. I'll add clamp here. For the minimum size, we want to have something like 0.5 rem units. And for maximum size, we want to have something like 2 rem units. We want those values, minimum and maximum, to be somewhere along the line of our body font sizes as we have specified here. 1 rem unit as the minimum font size and 2 rem units as the maximum font size. So this should be somewhere along those lines. We want it to be just a little bit smaller than our actual font size. Let's try resizing the window here and see how this looks. Okay, this should be a little bit better, but we still want to center those markers vertically. And as I mentioned, you cannot tweak positioning or margins of the marker pseudo element, but you can work around it just as we did here by adding the padding inline to our list items. So we will not tweak positioning of our marker, but rather we will tweak positioning of our links specified here. And let me open HTML really quickly. You see here that every list item contains only a link and nothing else. And that's why in this particular case, instead of trying to align markers to our content, we'll actually do the reverse and we will align the content, those links, to the marker. So let me return to CSS here and we will select all anchor links within our list items and we will just visually move it a little bit to the bottom. And to do that, we'll set positioning to relative here, inset block start, and this is logical equivalent of the top property. We will set this to 0.2 viewport width units. Let's try resizing our browser, and our small size and our very large size is not going to be ideal. So again, we will need to use clamp function here as well to limit minimum and maximum values for our inset block start property. Clamp minimum value should be something like 2 pixels and maximum value should be something like 5 pixels. And this is just a matter of trying to find the perfect value. So try as many different values until you find the one that will work for your particular case. So let's see if this is okay. Now small size is going to be okay. And for our larger sizes, This is not particularly okay, and I think the deal here is that this marker is actually becoming too big, so we want to restrict the maximum size a little bit. And this is going to be on our li marker pseudo-element. Let's set it to maximum of 1.5 rem units, and let's try it out now. And now this is looking pretty much okay. The last thing that I want to mention here is that when you're dealing with lists, whether unordered or ordered, you want to align text in your list items with the rest of the text. So in our example, we want to align this starting point of our text here with this starting point here, because currently this is disrupting to users' flow when they're reading. So they're going to read this line of text here, and then they're going to expect another line to start here and not here. And this will add just a slight bit of mental overhead, and you don't want to do that. It's almost always a better experience to have text aligned with the rest of the text and not text aligned with the bullet items or marker as we have in our case. To work around that, we will just add a negative margin to our list item exactly with the same value as we have our padding. So margin inline start is going to be minus 0.7 characters. And of course, we also want to remove padding from our UL item. So we're just going to set the entire padding to 0. There we go. Now this should be a little bit more readable. Now it seems that we don't have enough space between the edge of the element and the start of the text. So we will increase our inline padding here. And this is our container element. Padding inline should be 6 rem units. And this, at least to me, sometimes looks a little bit counterintuitive, but actually it's advice that a lot of typographers share. So as a rule of thumb, always align text with the text, even when you're dealing with the list items. If you just can't stand this, then align exactly the start of the star here with the start of the text here. At least something should be aligned. And that is just a general rule of design. You always want to align one object to another object because this will make your design much more harmonious, much more in balance. The last tip that I want to share with you is to use color fonts. And this is actually a little bit more of an edge case. It's not going to be always applicable, but the browsers these days already support color fonts. And if you want to learn more about color fonts, I have an in-depth guide on color fonts here on YouTube. So check that video. The link is going to be on screen and in the description. In any case, color fonts can look really impressive. You can adjust them and they can really lift up your design. I will open Google Fonts now. And here you have a checkbox, show only color fonts. There's not a lot of those fonts available at this moment, but I'm pretty sure that this collection will grow. And of course, you can probably find colored fonts elsewhere, not just on Google Fonts. For this example, let's just try using this Bungee Spice font. So I will click it. I will select the regular size here, and I will copy links here. I will return to my code pen, and I will add them into my head element right here. And now let's return back to Google Fonts. And let's copy the actual font family. I'll set this only on my headline right here. Now this looks very interesting, but it's not accessible. Luckily, there is an easy way to tweak the colors for our color fonts. And for that, we need font palette values at rule, add font palette values. And here we need an identifier, and this can be anything you want. I'm just going to use Bungee as is the name of our font. First thing that you need here is you need to specify which font you want to tweak, and this is going to be font family Bungee Spice. And now you can actually override colors for that font, and to override colors, well, you need to specify override colors property. Every color font has a number of colors within itself. I'm not going to show you here how to find those colors exactly. I go into detail in the video I mentioned. What you do here is you just specify the number of the color. For example, 0 is going to be the first color present in the font, and the actual color you want to use it with. We will overwrite colors present in this font with the colors we already have on the page. First color is going to be color from our background. So maybe let's select this pink one. I will paste it right here. And the second color that we want to overwrite is going to have index 1, and we will overwrite it with the yellow that we have on our links. And this is going to be this HSL color. So now we've basically created a new palette for our color font. All we need to do is we need to specify that we want to use that palette defined here, Bungee, on our font. This is going to be our H1 selector here where we have specified font family Bungee Spice. We're going to set font palette property to the identifier we have here, Bungee. This is not working, but as you can see, this is not really looking ideal. So I will try replacing this color we use from our background with another one, maybe this one. And this is looking a little bit better. Now we're going from yellow we have specified for our links to this orange that we already have on our background somewhere around here. As I mentioned, using color fonts might not always be a good idea, but that is absolutely something you can explore and add into your typography tool belt. So these are typography tips that I wanted to show you. And as you see, we added a few lines of code here and there, and we made our design more readable. Thank you so much for your attention. My name is Zoran Yangor. I will see and hear you in the next typography tip, or rather, in the next video.